Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this a little bit dreary Thursday morning. One quick announcement before we get started. I had put it in my newsletter, but I just want to, for the next couple of weeks, remind everybody, starting next semester, we're actually moving our Zooms with the principals to Wednesdays. They were originally Wednesday mornings when we did coffee with the principal. And then last year with distance learning, Thursday worked. And so I kept Thursday this year, but I actually in second semester have like several weeks where I have conflicts, and Wednesdays I don't have as many conflicts. So we're going to move it to Wednesdays, just rather than me like freaking out about not being available. But today we are continuing our talk about radical acceptance. Our focus today is going to be on our teenagers and less about ourselves personally. So I'm really excited about it. So thank you for those who put some stuff in the chat about what you need to accept about your teenager and what you think, what you'd like your teenager to accept about yourself. About themselves. And I really like Sylvia. I know some of you came in after Sylvia posted hers, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. I need to accept that my teen will try things I don't agree with, and I want him to accept that I'm his ally. And I think that that's really like just such a great way to start and set the tone for today. So thank you, Sylvia. Yvonne, what do you have to teach us today?
When you said that, I had this thought of like, what if I asked my mom what she would have answered back when I was a teenager? Like, I kind of wonder what she would have said. Like, what do you have to accept about your kid? I wrote myself a note to ask her when I see her tomorrow. So I'm a little bit worried, but just a little recap on radical acceptance for those who weren't here last week. Radical acceptance is a distress tolerant strategy. Humans don't like to be distressed or uncomfortable. And so we do the things necessary not feel that discomfort. And radical acceptance is one way we can do that. And that is by accepting reality, maybe not being excited about it, not being happy about it, but accepting the feelings that we're feeling about what's going on and then moving forward. It's the idea that life can be painful, but if we deny ourselves the feelings of that pain, that's when it becomes suffering. So the equation is pain plus denial equals suffering. And there's a lot of things where we just kind of push them aside and don't acknowledge our feelings or validate our own feelings, and it prolongs the suffering. So radical acceptance is this idea of like, I acknowledge that this is horrible. I acknowledge this is not my favorite place to be right now, but this is what it is. And I can do difficult things and I can move forward through it. So that's just the general idea of radical acceptance. So we talked a little bit last week about accepting ourselves, how imperfect we are, and we do our best as parents. And sometimes things come up where we don't have control over situations. And that's another piece of radical acceptance of like figuring out what things we have control over and what things we do not, right? I have control over turning off the Wi-Fi at night at 10 o'clock. I have control over turning the lights off in my kid's room. I do not have control over when he actually falls asleep. So just realizing that, you know, I know a lot of us take a lot of responsibility for our kiddos' actions, and we really don't have the power to make them do the things that we wish they would do. As much the whole concept of like leading a horse to water. We can do all of the things, but at the end of the day, I can make sure he goes to his English class, but I can't make sure that he's actually getting the work done. And the more that I think I have control over it, the more stress that brings me. I talked a little bit about my son who has some challenges in school and how I just started to micromanage him. And it didn't really change anything except the fact that I was mad all the time and stressed all the time. And it changed the fact that he no longer thought I was like a nice, easygoing mom. I kind of became the enemy through this process. And I think reflecting on, did I actually have control? Yes, I had control. I could take his video games away and do these things, but did I ever actually have control over my son's disdain for English? I just got an email from his teacher right now, and he said, if he does these assignments, he'll pass the semester. And I never thought that I'd be like, yes, a D, we're good. So that's kind of where I am right now with accepting my baby. So when you think about problems that we have, there really are only 4 solutions. Okay, so we have to pick which solution is kind of the most tolerable, sometimes a very difficult situation. What are our options? So there's 4 options to every problem. And the first option, if possible, we can solve the problem. If it's something within our control, we can solve the problem. But not everything is solvable. Maybe, if my problem is, oh, I need to, lose 20 pounds, I can go to the gym and eat better. I can solve that. The other option is to change our perspective. So if we can't solve the problem and it's something that's really frustrating for us, let's say you have a coworker that you're just not fond of. Can you change their personality and make them your best friend? Probably not. Can you change your perspective about that person? Can you maybe empathize about why they might be the way they are? Could you maybe use this as an opportunity for growth for yourself? Could this be a time where you challenge yourself to do hard things, like be nice to that person, right? Is that something you could do? So it's solve the problem if you can, change your perspective. And then the third one is accept reality for what it is. Wholeheartedly accepting the reality, saying it is what it is. And that is the most desirable. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but the fourth choice, so it's solve the problem, change your perspective, accept the situation radically. And the last one is stay miserable. And it sounds kind of like sarcastic, but it's like legitimately an option. We have the option to stay miserable in a situation. And sometimes we need that. Sometimes we just need to be mad and pouty and all that stuff. I know it's not helpful, but for some situations, it's okay to be upset. And so in a tough situation, it's not like you have to pick one of these and stick with it. Maybe at first I decided to stay miserable. And then after so much misery and suffering, I'm like, okay, I need to really change my perspective on this and then move forward and accept reality. So those are our options. And those are things that I think are really important to model for our kiddos, right? We have the tendency to, like, even for me, to be like, come on, get over it. People have it worse than you, that kind of thing. And I think it would be maybe a little more healthy to give them the options and let them figure out why radically accepting is a good choice. Why staying miserable might be not a good choice. And so why accept reality? Because rejecting reality doesn't change it. If I reject the fact that I don't like my coworker, does it change the way that my coworker behaves? No. Pain cannot be avoided. It's just our nature, like nature's way of signaling that something's wrong. And so just accepting that that's just part of human existence, right? We're going to have pain and suffering. Refusing to accept it keeps us stuck. It burns our energy. I use the analogy of being in the ocean, and the more you're trying to fight the waves, the more you're sinking. And sometimes we just have to put our arms out and let ourselves float to the surface. And that is kind of why radical acceptance is the best choice, because sometimes we're just fighting so hard and getting nowhere. It's like hamster wheel. We're just going, fighting. And it doesn't really lead us anywhere. So that's kind of one of the things that this week, as I was reflecting on radical acceptance and talking to my kids about certain things in life that we don't have the power to change. There were some frustrations at home, and just giving them the space to be upset, but also reminding them that they don't have the power to control that situation. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and maybe Ginny and Kayla, you can help me out here, but it doesn't have to be your kiddo. But what is something that you've had to accept about your partner, your kid, your in-law? Is there anything that has been really difficult to come to terms with? And you don't have to share it out loud. Well, you two do, but the rest of us don't have to. And then just kind of walk me through what that would have looked like had you used other options besides radical acceptance, right? Like, what are the options that you could do? How could you solve it if you can? How could you change your perspective? And what happens if you stay miserable?
So one thing I've had to, accept, and I actually practice this with my homework. I mean, it's been a process all year long, but it was what I focused on with our homework that we gave ourselves this week, and accepting that my son does not want to do his homework and is going to fight me on it every night. And I just had to accept that, just accepting that there's going to be a fight, and he's going to argue with me. He's not going to want to put down his iPad, stop playing his game, to do his math homework. And I'm going to fight with him about this, and just accept that. I would rather this not happen. I would rather him just do his homework and get it done. And this is something I would just wish that he would accept it. If he actually did his homework, it would take 15 minutes and then he'd have more time for his game. But he's not there. So I need to accept that he's not there and that we're going to have this fight. And so what I noticed this week with me really kind of shifting my focus, and instead of just, I think I was more in the misery, just dreading it, miserable, oh, this is gonna suck so much. And you put it off, okay, a half hour from now, I'm gonna have this fight with him because I don't want to do it right now. And so what I found, this week, which is doing this, all right, he's gonna fight me. What I noticed was I was a lot calmer, and it actually was easier because I was calmer. I wasn't yelling at him. I just knew okay, he's going to fight me with this. But because I was calm about it, he actually was a lot more willing to work with me. And we did get it done a lot faster. So I really noticed that this week, that that just kind of shifted my perspective, me not fighting it and just accepting it. It made it easier.
Yeah. And I like that you didn't say I just accept the fact that he's never going to do his homework and I'm okay with that, because that's never going to happen.
No,
that's not an option, but you can accept that it's going to be difficult. Yeah, I kind of I don't know if I solved the problem, but I delegated the problem to a math tutor to manage all of his assignments, because I knew for both of our safety that it wasn't a good job for me. So that was my solve for the same situation.
I feel like that's helpful to have to kind of disperse, where it's not just one person pushing one thing for either party, but kind of dispersing so everyone kind of gets a break. That can be really helpful.
And knowing when it's not a good time for you, right? We have that at work between the social workers of sometimes you're not in the headspace to do what you need to do. And it's okay to be okay, tonight is really not the night that I'm going to deal with math homework. I'm not in the space. I was cranky all day. I haven't eaten dinner. I just have to kind of relinquish that because it's going to turn south really quickly. Does anybody else want to share? Does anybody have anything that maybe stood out this week that was a frustration or something that you had to accept? It was some homework. And it's okay if you don't.
I can also share an experience that I have. I don't have children myself, but I think about this a lot with my mom. So, usually, like you mentioned, I want to ask my parents that kind of intro question too. But my mom has some health complications that can make it really challenging, where she needs a lot of help. She also is her own person and makes her own decisions, and not all those decisions are healthy for her, like smoking, eating habits, etc., where me and my brother find ourselves really frustrated a lot. And so me and my brother kind of both have different approaches. He is working on his radical acceptance, where I can kind of coach him with that, because I've found, if we kind of strong arm her into making different decisions for herself, we can't do that. There's no way we can make decisions for her and what she does with her life. And sometimes like the best course of action is to have a good relationship, and keeping a good relationship might end up actually getting the results that we want. So we kind of switch off where he might be in that frustrated, miserable zone or really solution focused, rather than just accepting that that's where we're at. Other days I'm more solution focused, and I ask him to take the more like supportive, accepting route, because if we're both on like full court press, we're probably not going to get the results that we want. But yeah, it is ultimately, it's been several years that I've been working on radically accepting this, and it's really helped our relationship. Some changes are made, some changes aren't, but she's an adult. So
It's so hard to accept the things that are harming the people that you love, right? Like my kid, like the kid's not doing their homework is harming them in the long run. Your mom's health is harming her. How do we accept? We don't have to accept that it's okay for her to harm herself, but we do have to accept that we don't have control over it. So the more connected we are, the more painful it is. But regardless, it's like we don't have the power to do anything differently.
These are like, I always have to remind myself with this when I think about acceptance, that acceptance doesn't mean approval. It's a little mantra I have. Like, acceptance doesn't mean approval. You don't have to like it. Like, and the things that I have to accept, I never like them, but you still have to accept them. Like it's just, because otherwise you're just fighting them, and like that's so much energy in fighting something that you can't change.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about, accepting our kiddos, and maybe there's some things that we do that show our kids that we don't accept them without being really blatant about it, if that makes sense. So when you think about parents who are really judgy of their kids, these like really like dramatic examples, think of like the parent on the sideline at the soccer game who's screaming at their kid, "Come on, you suck, you could do," those real extreme ones. We can say like, oh yeah, I've seen those kind of parents, right? And that's obvious that they're criticizing their kiddo. Maybe our kid doesn't want to play a sport, and somebody like forces them to play and they're miserable, and it's like totally obvious. Like that might be a parent who is not fully accepting their kid, right? Like, I wish my kid would play baseball, but he would prefer to be in the video game championship or whatever, right? And so it's like my behavior towards it can really convey to him whether or not I accept him. We're horrified by parents who don't accept their kids for their beliefs or their sexuality. Like those are the more extreme examples of like, disapproving of your kid. Such overt examples of parents projecting their own expectations and goals in kids they're very easy to spot. But what are the things that are a little bit more subtle that maybe we're doing? I like to start it off with the that I know all of us have good intentions. We want good things for our kids. When I meet with a family, I always want to find that common ground. And the common ground is that we both want this kid to be happy, healthy, and successful. Maybe the things that we're doing aren't really conveying that to the student, but in generally speaking, I think parents have great intentions, myself included, Miss Davis included. Like, we have really good intentions. We want really good things for our kids, but what are we doing that might not be making our kiddos feel that? You're like, I love you, and sometimes they're like, no, actually I don't, based on the way that you've been behaving, right? This quote as I was going through this, it kind of made me sad, because I've been reflecting a lot this week on my behavior, and I talk about it all the time with Kayla, but oh, my kid's so frustrating. My other kids were so easy, and this one is just like a pain. And it says, we worry about what a child will become tomorrow, yet we forget that he is someone today. I'm so focused on his future, and I forget the today, right? I was just telling Kayla a story this morning of, I'm so focused on how he does in school. And I was thinking about something that happened the other day. I had a really long day at work. I went home, I was super tired, and my 13-year-old comes into my room, and he had made me a cup of hot chocolate. Like, he knew that that's something my other two would have never done. And it got me thinking of like, man, I'm so hyper-focused on how he's not performing in school. Like, how special is this moment, and how kind and empathetic to even think of me to do that. And that's so lost on me being so worried about tomorrow and how is he going to survive? And am I going to have to buy him a house? Like, how is he going to live? And I just, in the moment, like he's the softest, sweetest kid that I have. And I don't think about that often because I'm so focused on tomorrow. Right? So it made me like a little emotional, like, oof, wow, what about today? You know, I'm missing out on a lot. So this next part is like, how do we communicate disapproval? You know, most people believe that our job is to mold our kids and we're constantly trying to like make them better, improve them, impact their choices. It's like we're always fighting for the betterment of their future. But what are we doing to communicate disapproval? And the first one is we do it when we are dismissive or critical of their feelings, needs, ideas, and decisions. How many times does kiddo make a choice that I'm not particularly thrilled about? And how do I communicate that to him? Like, I would say something like, oh my gosh, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Right? That's not conveying, you know, validation of his feelings. Right. And so that's one way that we can communicate our disapproval. It's just invalidating, being dismissive about, you know, oh, I know English is hard. It's hard for everyone. Like not really taking the time to be present and listen. In any of these, if there's something where you're like, yeah, I can totally relate to that, or I've done that, or, you know, please feel free to share. Because I think it's important to be vulnerable because we're all in this together. We all know, we're all, I think, in agreement that we're doing the best that we can. And that we have great intentions, but maybe these things have been something that we've inadvertently done that can be harmful for, you know, them feeling like we actually approve of who they really are. We do it when we compare them to others in an effort to influence them. I hear this all the time. Your cousin did that. Your sister took that class. I did this. I had depression and didn't need to go to a doctor. I got through that. I, you know, was able to do that by your age. You know, it's like we think that we're encouraging them to be something better and bigger, but what we're really doing is invalidating who they are in this moment. So guilty. Guilty of comparing to the brothers, like literally on the regular, like daily, like, and maybe not to him. And if you want to read that, Jenny, I can.
I need to accept the daily challenges with my kiddos in middle and high school, different schedule, and get them up in the morning, ensure that they have breakfast and get them to school on time and be ready to learn. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mornings are terrible.
That's the one thing I miss about distance learning is rolling out of bed and pouring some cereal.
Mornings were a lot easier when we were all at home and we didn't have to leave the house. That is for sure.
I felt like super mom until I had to leave the house again. And that reality of all those things in the morning, you know, there's so many responsibilities that we have. And then on top of that, it's like, there's a lot we have to do to nurture them emotionally. So it's like full-time job. We do it when we are embarrassed by them being themselves, when we apologize to others for them. Guilty. You know, this is one of those things where I take great pride in going like on a camping trip, and I have 3, you know, boys, 18, 15, and 13. And when people say things like, oh my gosh, your boys are so quiet and well behaved, I'm like patting myself on the back. I'm like a rock star, right? Like you feel validated by people complimenting your kiddos. You know, if they're like acting wild, I'm like embarrassed that like they're going to think I'm a bad mom. Like it's not really about them in that moment. It's about people's perception of how I parented them, right? So when they do something that's like maybe not on my approval list, and that embarrassment I feel to like my core of like, ugh, is really difficult. And I never thought of it from the perspective of like, that communicates disapproval. Like maybe they're just having fun and being silly, right? I don't know that I gave my kids enough space to do that in public, because that perception of like having my kids in check for me was kind of my pride of like, yeah, my kids are easy. Look at those kids are like wild, they're all over the place. Those kids were probably having more fun than mine were, like in hindsight, right? So when we're embarrassed by them, you know, 2 of my kids are super athletic. One of them is not. I remember him playing baseball, and when he would go up to bat, I literally sometimes felt like this. Horrible, guilty, right? You know, and I don't know that, I hope that he didn't notice that, my communication of disapproval. You know, maybe it was just about myself. You know, I was a super athlete, and so for me that was a big deal. And you know, this is kind of for me, like reflecting on, like, not to like beat myself up, because I accept that I've done the best that I can as a parent, but to like really think about what's really important in the long run. We do it when we dictate what they can and cannot be interested in, ridiculing them for their interest in things that we deem as unimportant. Video games on the phone, just silly thing. I don't know if you can think of anything, Jenny, but like something that maybe your kiddo is totally into that it's hard to feign interest. YouTube.
I mean, yeah, he's got his games. He's got a really expensive, for me, Lego habit. I was actually looking at my family room this morning, and I'm like, look at how many Legos are in here. This is unreal. And so he's got his, you know, because it's Christmas time, his Lego advent calendar. And so every day he shows me like what the new, and I'm like, oh, that's really awesome. Care. But, you know, I've got to like, you know, like, because it's something he super cares about. So, yeah.
That's not an easy one. My husband and I always have this kind of like, he's like, man, the kids always talk to you. And I literally tell him, like, do you know how many things I've had to fake interest in so that they like me? What does it say?
I like this comment, being an avid fan of Kanye and Kanye merch.
Oh, that would be a really tough one.
That is a tough one.
Like so many opinions about Kanye, right? And then if your kid was like mega fan, yeah, good luck on that one. That's a great one. I love it. But if you learn some lyrics, I think that can give you a lot of credibility with your kiddo. The next one is we do it with our disapproving frowns. I don't know about you guys, but in my life, no matter what stage of life I'm in, it feels really good to get approval from my parents. Like my sisters have made some interesting choices in life. And so I've kind of been this like golden child, and it feels good, right? When your parents are like, oh, good job with all the things that you're doing. And, you know, I'm trying to think of times when my parents, maybe I saw them like with a disapproving frown, and I can't actually think of any times, but now I'm reflecting on my kiddos. It's like, uh-oh, have they seen that from me? Like the look of like, you know, disapproval, not disapproval, like sometimes I'm disapproving if they like get bad grades or make a bad choice or something like that, but just being disapproving of like their interests, their friends, like just the things that are important to them. That's something that I've been guilty of. This next one might feel a little confusing, but we do it with praise and rewards. Actually, let me see this comment. I can't. Similar to the last comment, I listen to the music my kid likes, even though I don't like the lyrics. I try to ask why he thinks they talk a lot about alcohol, for example. That's a fantastic example. That's a hard one. It's so easy to be like, turn that off. That's telling you bad stuff about drinking. But to take the opportunity to show interest and be inquisitive about it, I think that's a fantastic way to handle it. Yeah. This next one is we do it with praise and rewards. Ginny, are you more punitive in your approach with parenting, or are you more reward system?
I am so guilty of bribing my kids into doing what I want them to do. I'm not a punisher. I really am not. I was actually talking to a friend of mine this weekend about this, because we have a mutual friend who is like so strict with her kids, and like is like having like problems with her kid right now, and like Jimmy said, like it's so strict. And my other friend and I are like, oh, I can't even imagine. Like that's just not who I am. Like not at all.
Not above bribing. I agree.
Yeah.
I might have shared this last week where I made the mistake of my kiddo who is struggling in school to like pay per grade. It's not a great strategy, but I was like, I will give you $60 for an A, $50 for a B, on and on and on. And then my freshman, who's straight A student, overheard and like made the argument that that's not fair. And so I'm going to be out probably $360 for that one because, you know, and I said it because I wasn't, this is horrible, but I wasn't anticipating A's.
No, it definitely backfires. Like my son, who's 12 and is going through puberty and has not quite learned that deodorant is an everyday thing.
Right.
You know, last night I was like, Nathan, you really have to take a shower. Like, you need to clean yourself. And he was like, are you going to pay me $10? And I'm like, no. He's like, well, then I'm not going to be clean. And I'm like, part of me is like, how bad does he stink? And I was like, you know what? You can go to school stinky. It's fine.
I know. And it's like, you're trying to protect him, right? Because it's like, I'd rather tell you.
Right. I don't want the other kids to be like, oh, Nathan, he's the stinky kid.
So it looks like the going rate for bribes is $1 for putting away stuff and $5 for helping with yard work, which I think it's a good grade, a good rate. My mother, I can't even imagine her paying me to do chores when I was young. Like, I don't know how she got me to do it. I must have been like fearful or something. I don't know. Cause I'm like, how did my mom, like literally when we knew she was coming home from work, she had this like porcelain clown collection and we had to take them all down and dust and do all the stuff. And we always had it done. And I'm like, what was her strategy? Was she just more threatening than I am? Like what, what's different? And why is this costing me? Right? They live rent free. And yet I'm still paying you to do like basic, take the garbage out. Like it's kind of wild. So definitely a different generation. I guess I'm a little bit guilty of creating some monsters. Guilty. Guilty. So praise and rewards. I think it never sounded like a bad thing to me, but I don't know, Jenny, what do you think? Like, why would this be listed as disapproval?
I think, well, I mean,
I'm trying to like,
you're not accepting them as they are right then, right? You're like trying to change, I think it's like the parent trying to control the behavior, right? And you're trying to force either through a punitive way or through bribery and like, you know, like trying to change what they're doing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think that, you know, this is kind of, it is our role as a parent, right? We do have to do this a little bit, but I think when you rely on it too much, like for every little thing, that's when it gets really like bad.
Like put your own dish in the sink and he's like, well, how much am I gonna get? Right.
Right. Like then like you created this little monster and like that's not
like that. My husband comes home and he's like, why are you offering all this money for them to do the things they have to do? And I'm like, well, I couldn't get them to do it. And he's like, well, that sounds like a parenting problem. And then it just turns into this whole thing, right? I'm reading Vincent's comment about $5 for doing their own laundry. And again, thinking back to my mom, she would have been like, you can wear stinky clothes to school and get made fun of all you want, or you could do your laundry, right? It was never like a matter of, oh, please do this. But I think it's back to that like snowplow parenting this morning, like same with my son, like that shirt's dirty. Like I'm so involved in him, like looking good and smelling good because I don't want him to get bullied. I don't want him to be the stinky kid in his class. And so I'm really not allowing him to have natural consequences because I'm afraid for him, right? I'm protecting him.
Right. And I think that, I mean, this is the balancing act of parenting. Like, you know, you have to, like, as parents, we have to make a judgment call and like, when are we going to step in and prevent something? Or when are we going to let those natural consequences play out? I mean, I see it all the time in my role as principal, and parents like emailing me and like, you know, like, oh, and trying to interfere in what's happening with grades and like, you know, what's happening. They didn't study for the test. They failed the test, or they didn't turn in their homework. They got a bad grade. There are consequences to that. And I think that as parents, like we really need to at times, and this is the part where we have to accept, like we have to accept, like, let the consequences play out. It's really hard as a parent because you don't want, I don't want my son to be teased at school for having BO. He probably, you know, but he didn't take a shower. Like, I have to, like, he's got to learn that, like, I can't always be the one controlling this and telling it, because, and like part of raising teenagers is they do have to learn that.
Yeah. This comment here, it says, do we parents have to do that with our own children? Why don't we explain for them everyone in the family has some housework to do? Why do we pay money for them to do our housework? That's exactly the question, right? And I think for me, my mistake was not setting that precedent when they were really young, right? And so now I'm in this position of like, I'm so busy with life, and it's been a way that I've just tried to simplify things for myself rather than doing the hard thing. So I don't want you to take what we're saying as like, this is what you should be doing, because that's not the point at all. This is like what I'm trying to do to correct the things I didn't do right when they were growing up, right? So this is just kind of like an admission of guilt of not parenting in a perfect way. Like we host these with vulnerability because I've done stupid things as a parent, right? I've made mistakes. I should have done things differently. And so this is kind of just an expression of those frustrations and how we're trying to just get through, right? Parenting is hard. Like somebody mentioned, we make breakfast, we take them to school, we do all these things. We still have to get ready for work and make sure we have groceries and do all these things. And then sometimes I come home and the kids haven't done their chores, and the last thing I want to do is get into an argument with them. So it's easier for me to pull $5 out of my wallet. And that's my strategy, not a healthy strategy, but the strategy that I've done. My son is my business partner now. Just don't tell mom. Thank you. I thought I did wrong. No, if your kiddo is doing work to contribute to the house, then I want you to teach the next lesson, because that's fantastic. You've done something right. So good job on that. We do it when, so remember, we're communicating disapproval when we do that. We do it when we force our quiet and reserved child into uncomfortable situations, hoping that they will be more outgoing, pushing for things to be different rather than like gently supporting them through those difficult things. We do it when we admonish our loud, extroverted children so that they will be more restrained. I don't have loud children, but I've been guilty of like hanging around friends who have like really hyper overactive children and almost having this sense of like judgment of like, oh, my kids are so quiet and well behaved, that's like a parenting thing. And again, like, gosh, maybe these kiddos have had way more fun than mine have, having to abide by my rules all these years. It says switch roles for a day so they could really understand. I talk about all the time, like, I need to go on strike, like between my husband and the 3 boys who just assume that I'm supposed to make dinner, even though I have a job too. Like, yeah, I don't know that it would help. I hope it would, but.
I think that was something my mom did when we were young. She's like, okay, you're not doing it. I'm not doing it. And then we're like, because she did everything. And then we had to learn, and then appreciation came pretty fast.
Yep. Tough love. We do it when we shame our strong, confident children into being more amenable. We do it when we judge our shy children and pressure them to be more social. We do it when we focus on extinguishing behaviors that displease us instead of communicating and problem solving together. We do it in endless ways. Some are glaringly obvious, but some are just as subtle as the tone of our voice. So just, I want you to reflect on that for a few minutes of like, how have I shown disapproval to my kiddo? And this isn't like to like put you on blast and make you feel like a horrible parent, but it's just to reflect on like, hey, maybe there are some subtle things that I've done that have communicated to my kid that I don't approve of who they really are. Sometimes my kid will say things like, I know you hate me. And I'm like, that's stupid. Of course I don't. But now I'm like kind of reflecting on it. Like, have I done anything subtly that might make him feel like I don't accept him for who he is? And as I go through this list, yeah, absolutely. I've absolutely done things that I think communicated to him that he's not enough, or I need him to be better, or I'm not happy with who he is. And, it makes me feel bad. Like I said, there's so many qualities about my kiddo that are so good and so overlooked. And so maybe it was from one of the classes we did a couple of weeks ago, but I've really been trying to focus on the positive for him. Like, gosh, I even told my husband yesterday, like, find something good that he did. And sometimes that's really hard to do, but really trying to focus on the things that aren't related to academics, because that's not his strength right now. And so, but he has so many strengths that we don't even acknowledge because I'm so hyper focused on tomorrow, getting him through tomorrow. This quote actually made me want to cry this morning. I was like, oh gosh, here we go. It says, you can't teach children to behave better by making them feel worse. When children feel better, they behave better. And I'm like, oh, yeah. How many times have I made them feel badly and then expected positive changes? If Miss Davis came to me every day and was like, you suck at your job, I don't like the way you do things, and then expected me to do my job better, I think my self-esteem would probably be crushed. I wouldn't feel the trust in my relationship. And it's like, why is that okay with my kiddo? It's not. And again, it's not meant to like, oh, you're horrible parents. It's like, no, just reflecting on you're human. You have emotions that are connected to the behaviors and the success of your children. And it's okay. Like, I think it's okay to admit that you haven't done everything right. And I can admit that today. Like, oh gosh, I could have done better. I should have done better. I will do better, So what does this mean in day-to-day life? That we should just let our kids do everything they want? This is what's wrong with the world today. I can hear people saying that already, but it's not that we want them to do whatever they want. It just means that as we approach each situation with acceptance, then we stop seeing things as like behavior management and seeing things where we have to make people change, but rather seeing things as, I need to communicate this, or I need to empathize with this. You accept them just as they are and work out a way to live together joyfully. So sometimes you'll be able to help them see why behaviors are difficult, but also being careful of like, how do we convey that, right? So radical acceptance in parenting, letting go of preconceived ideas that your kiddo is supposed to be a certain way. And let me see, sorry. This is just kind of like a brief list of like, how do we do that? How do we make them feel okay? Okay, so number one is knowing your kiddo. How well do you know your kiddo? How much time have you dedicated to just spending time with them, being present and tuned in with them? It's a difficult task, again, when we reflect on like all the things that we have to do in a day. It's like at work, I'm listening to people's troubles all day long. And so sometimes when I get home, the last thing I want to do is hear all the drama that happened at my kiddo's school. So he probably notices that I'm checked out, that I'm not present. So taking that time to focus on the present moment and be there and be present with your kiddo is one way to help them feel accepted, that you completely and radically accept them. The next one is like change your perspective and maybe appreciate the differences. Like my kiddo, he's not great in school. He makes me hot chocolate and cares about how I feel. Like that for me is so important. I want him to be a wonderful human more than I want him to be like the scholar that gets into Harvard. At the end of the day, I want my kid to be a good person. And if that, means that, he's my hot chocolate making, maybe not super studious kiddo, like I'm okay with that. The next one is approach problems compassionately. We are always looking to fix our kiddos' problems. We are always judging the problems, minimizing the problems, and validating the problems, but approach their problems with compassion. Instead of trying parenting tricks to get them to behave and do things we want them to do, approach them with like an open heart and an open mind to that what they're expressing is real to them in that moment. Maybe to you it's silly, maybe it's not important. A lot of times I'll hear families kind of like invalidate their kiddo's heartbreak in a relationship because they're only freshmen and what do they know anyways and things like that. But really, if we can approach their situations with compassion and like love and like just open to like hear what they have to say, I think that's another way that we can, radically accept them. Communicate our acceptance. Be honest about the things that are good, let them know that like, you can be honest and say like, this is really tough for me because it's not something that I really was hoping would happen, but I'm really working through that. And just be honest. Like there's certain things where, I didn't want my kiddo to date. And when you got a first girlfriend, like I was like saying really negative things. Like, I'm going to tell you guys what I said, but it was really tough, but just accepting him where he is. A couple more points. Know your triggers. I know homework time is my trigger. I know my kids' school stuff is my trigger. So maybe I'm not the woman for the job. You know, if it gets me so worked up, you know, I know that's my trigger. And then realizing, like, what am I reacting to? Am I reacting to fear for his future? Am I reacting to his defiance? Am I reacting to how his grades are a reflection of me? Like, what's at the root of what I'm feeling about my kiddo? Empathize. That's a big one. Really, truly. There are experiences that our kids are going through in high school that we will never understand. I've not been bullied on Instagram. I have not had people take pictures of me at school and post them on the internet. I have not dealt with a lot of the things. I never had to, you know, see all these beautiful people on Instagram when I'm getting ready for school as a high schooler. I have not had that experience. And so really being able to empathize with the fact that things are different, you know, and not just saying like, oh, I had it worse or someone has it worse, but just empathizing with where they are. And then lastly is accepting yourself. If you believe everyone it deserves to be accepted as they are and for who they are, then that also has to include ourselves. So we are not perfect. We do the best that we can. And I think that's the most important thing that we can show our kiddos. So just one last little segment here is like, how do we get our kids to practice this? What do we do to get them to practice radical acceptance and, you know, give them the opportunity to be open? For some of us, our kids talk to us. For some of us, they don't. And so depending on where you are in your relationship, giving your kiddos opportunity to share, you know, making sure, I say this all the time, ask your kiddo, do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to give you advice? Do you need me just to be mad? Like, give them the opportunity to tell you what they need. We can't just assume that we know. It says, ask them to name their emotions. You know, they can put words to it. It makes things a little bit easier to communicate. Don't try to solve the problem or trivialize what they feel. Just listen. Ask them what would help. Is there anything I could do to help? How can I help you cope with this? Remind them that sometimes getting out of our own head and helping others can be helpful. And then lastly, remind them that they are not alone, that it's okay, and that you're there for them. So just help our kiddos to radically accept life. They're going to have things happen that are difficult. You know, we've kind of noticed the energy in the air this week with being the week before finals. I'm noticing a lot of anxiety about how they're going to perform on these tests and what that means. And it doesn't just stop at, I'm going to bomb this test. Like, literally some of the kiddos are like, I'm going to bomb this test. My parents are going to hate me. I'm not going to make it into a college. I'm going to live under a bridge because I'm never going to get a job. I mean, they go down this rabbit hole of worry. So really just letting them know that you're there for them, whether they pass or fail or they do well. You know, make sure that we're just giving them space to just feel what they're feeling. So
I have something I want to add to your list, specifically about this idea of radical acceptance. I think it could be helpful to ask them what they can control, like in their current problem or what they're worried about. What aspect of that can they control? If they're worried about finals, what they can control is how much sleep they're getting, how much they're studying. Like, that's something they can control. They can't change the past. So if they didn't, you know, keep up with something, or they, you know, fell behind 2 months ago, that's not, they can't control that happened. And so that's part of the acceptance of like, okay, this is where they are right now, and just accepting like, okay, what happened, and now what can they control right now, I think is helpful.
yeah, there's a lot of worksheets online. Like you would look under like DBT and radical acceptance, and there's a lot of worksheets that you can find that like really help you like list out all of your worries and then divide them between things I have control over, things I do not have control over. And it's amazing how many things I've fooled myself into thinking I can control, and then realizing that nope, nothing. There's not a whole lot we can control besides our own behavior, you know. So
thank you. So next week we're going to talk about, we're actually going to kind of look into the end of the year and setting some New Year's resolutions or goal setting for either, I guess you could say the next calendar year or just the next semester, you know, with our kids and like helping them like look forward and like, okay, it kind of goes with this idea of the radical acceptance of like, okay, this is where I'm at right now, but where do I want to be? And like, what do I want to do to get there? So let me stop